Welcome to today's deep dive, where we're going to be looking at how our childhoods can impact our parenting styles. And to guide us, we'll be using the really interesting book, The Book You Wish Your Parents Had Read, written by Philippa Perry.
I think it's fascinating how much our early experiences can shape our parenting, and we don't even realize it sometimes.
I know, right? It's amazing how much it comes out, and Perry's book really delves into that. Like, one of the big things that stood out to me was how our kids can sometimes bring up those old unresolved feelings from our own WN childhood.
hmm
And that can make us react in ways that we end up regretting.
Absolutely. The book actually gives a really good example of this with a mom named Tay.
hmm
So she overreacts when her daughter gets stuck on a climbing frame. Turns out her reaction actually came from her own WN childhood. Her mom was overprotective.
Oh, wow.
So it just shows how these unresolved issues, they can really come out in our parenting without us even realizing it.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Sometimes I'll react to something my kids do, and I'm like, whoa, where did that come from? It feels way bigger than it should be.
Totally. And this kind of goes back to attachment theory. Like those early experiences we have in childhood, they really shape how we respond emotionally, even as adults.
Makes sense.
And that
Yeah.
includes how we parent. Those early attachment patterns, they can stick with us.
It's like our past is always kind of there in the background, even when we don't know it.
Right.
And the book talks about this as like emotional baggage we carry with us,
Mm-hmm.
and it can weigh us down.
Definitely. And that's where Perry really emphasizes the importance of recognizing those patterns.
Okay, yeah.
It's about figuring out what's a current frustration and what's actually coming from an old hurt.
Yeah.
Because we want to be responding to our child's needs, not just reacting to our own baggage.
So true. It's so easy to get caught up in those old feelings. But how do we even start to unpack all that baggage and see those triggers?
Well, the book actually has a really practical exercise for this.
Okay.
It suggests that when you feel a strong negative emotion toward your child, just pause for a second
Mm-hmm.
and ask yourself, like, does this feeling actually belong to this situation entirely? Or is there something else going on?
It's like taking a step back, right?
Exactly. That pause can give us the space to figure out what's really driving our reaction. Are we mad because our child is actually doing something wrong? Or are we reacting to something deeper, you know, like a ghost from our own past?
Interesting.
A powerful question to ask ourselves.
So we've talked about recognizing these patterns, but what about actually breaking them? I mean, it can feel so hard to change those automatic responses.
Right. It definitely takes work.
Yeah.
But Perry tells this really interesting story about a dad named Mark who really struggled with this. He felt trapped by fatherhood, resentful even, especially towards his young son.
Oh, wow.
On the surface, it seemed like maybe he just wasn't cut out for fatherhood. But as the story goes on, we find out that Mark's own father abandoned him when he was little.
Oh, no.
And it turns out his resentment towards his son, it actually stemmed from the pain of his own abandonment.
So it wasn't about his son at all, really.
Exactly. Like he was so afraid of repeating that cycle, of becoming the abandoning father himself.
That's heartbreaking.
It is. This actually relates to something in psychology called repetition compulsion. It's this idea that we unconsciously repeat past traumas, almost like we're trying to gain control over them somehow.
Trying to fix it in a way.
Right. Like for Mark, fatherhood felt like a burden, a trap, because that was the model he had.
So what happened to Mark? Did he ever break free from that cycle?
Thankfully, yes. Mark ended up going to therapy. He started to confront the pain of his own abandonment.
Good for him.
And through that process, he was finally able to connect with his son in a real, genuine way. It's such a powerful example of how facing our past can really lead to healing.
I love that. It's such a hopeful story.
It is. It shows us that we can break free from those negative patterns and create something so much better, something more loving and fulfilling for ourselves and our children.
And it's not just about avoiding the negative, right? It's
Yeah.
about remembering to pass on the good stuff too, like the positive things from our upbringing that we want to share with our kids.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We have this incredible opportunity to choose which parts of our legacy we want to carry forward. We can decide what we want to embrace and what we want to leave behind.
It's powerful stuff. Perry talks about this idea of desertion as a spectrum, and it really made me think, like, she's challenging how we usually think about abandonment. It's not just physical.
Right. She's saying that desertion can actually be a lot of different behaviors that create emotional distance between a parent and child. And those behaviors, they can happen even when the parent is physically present.
So it's like you can be there, but not really there.
Yes.
So things like dismissing your child's feelings or not engaging with their play, or even just constantly putting your own needs before theirs, that all creates distance.
Yeah, all of those things. And even if you're not doing it on purpose, they can make a child feel emotionally abandoned.
Wow. I never thought about it that way.
It's pretty powerful, isn't it?
It is.
Makes you think.
It really
Now,
does. I think we've covered a lot in this first part of our deep dive.
we have. And in the next part, we're going to keep talking about this desertion as a spectrum idea and really explore what it means for parenting.
Sounds good. This is a topic that definitely deserves more exploration. We'll be back after the break to continue our conversation.
Okay, so we were talking about this idea of desertion as a spectrum before the break. It's really interesting because it makes you think about all the subtle ways we can create distance in our relationships with our kids, even if we're physically there.
Yeah, it's not always about a parent actually leaving. It's more about those little everyday things that can add up and make a child feel emotionally disconnected.
Exactly. Like imagine a kid trying to tell their parent something that's important to them. And instead of really listening, the parent just brushes them off or tries to distract them.
Oh yeah, I've been guilty of that myself. Sometimes when I'm stressed, I just tune out a bit, even though I know I should be paying attention.
It happens to all of us.
Hmm.
But it makes you think about how easy it is to fall into those patterns, especially if that's the kind of emotional distance we experience growing up.
So true. It's like we're repeating what we know, even if it wasn't the best.
It's a cycle, for
Mm,
sure.
mm.
If we didn't learn how to be emotionally close, it can be hard to do that for our own children.
So how do we break that cycle? Perry talks about something called engaged observation, which sounds like a really powerful way to connect with our kids on a deeper level.
Engaged observation is all about being present, truly present, with our children. It's about putting down the phone, making eye contact, and really listening to what they're saying without judgment.
It's like saying, hey, I see you, I hear you, you matter to me.
Exactly. And those messages, they're so important for a child's self-esteem, for them to feel valued.
Absolutely. You know, this reminds me of something I've been thinking about a lot lately. I have this tendency to want to cheer my kids up when they're sad or distract them when they're angry. It just feels natural, you know? Like
Okay.
I want to protect them from those negative emotions.
It's a very common reaction.
Yeah.
But when we try to brush aside a child's feelings or tell them they shouldn't feel that way, we're sending the message that those emotions are wrong or that they shouldn't have them.
Oh, wow.
And that can actually be really damaging. It can teach kids to suppress their emotions, which can lead to problems down the line.
So it's better to just let them feel those feelings, even the hard ones.
It is. It's about validating their experience.
Hmm.
You don't have to agree with the feeling, but you can acknowledge it. Like instead of saying, don't be so dramatic, you could say something like, I see you're really angry right now. It's about empathy.
So we're not trying to fix it, just be there with them in it.
Exactly. And that's how kids learn to regulate their own emotions. They learn that it's okay to feel all those feelings, the good and the bad. And they learn how to cope with them without getting completely overwhelmed.
This is all making me realize how important it is to ingress our own emotional baggage. Like, if we're still carrying around unresolved stuff from our past, it's going to affect how we parent, whether we realize it or not.
Absolutely. And that's what's so insightful about Perry's book. It's not about blaming our parents or dwelling on those old hurts. It's about understanding how those experiences have shaped us and then making conscious choices to do things differently.
It's about self-awareness, right? Like noticing those patterns from our past that might be popping up in the present.
Exactly. And remember that practical exercise we talked about earlier?
Yeah, the one about asking, where does this feeling come from?
That's a really powerful tool for separating the past from the present so that we can respond to our child's needs in the moment without all that baggage weighing us down.
It's like hitting the reset button, in a way.
It is. And it takes a lot of honesty and courage to really look inward like that. But the rewards are huge, both for us and for our relationships with our kids. It can be truly transformative.
I'm starting to see that.
It's a journey, for sure, but a really worthwhile one.
I think so too. It's pretty amazing when you think about it, how much power we have to choose how our past affects us. It's not about blaming our parents or getting stuck in the past, but it's about understanding it and then consciously making different choices. And one of the things Perry talks about that can really help with that is self-care.
Yeah, self-care. It's so important, but it's often the first thing to go, especially when we're busy with parenting.
Hmm.
It's easy to put everyone else's needs first.
But Terry really makes a good point about making self-care a priority. It's like that saying about the oxygen masks on a plane, you know?
Oh,
You got to put on your own mask first before you can help anyone else. It's the same with parenting. If we're running on empty, we won't be able to show up for our kids the way we need to.
that's such a good analogy. Taking care of ourselves isn't selfish. It's actually essential for our families to be happy and healthy. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy.
Right. It's not always bubble baths and spa days, though those are nice once in a while.
Definitely. But really, self-care is about finding things that make you feel good, that nourish your mind and body. Maybe it's taking a walk, reading a book, connecting with friends, or working on a hobby. Anything that fills you up and helps you feel more like yourself.
For sure.
And sometimes self-care also means setting boundaries, like learning to say no to things that drain you and leave you feeling depleted. It's about knowing your limits and making your well-being a priority.
This whole conversation has really got me thinking
Hmm.
about my own reactions, my own patterns, and what I want to pass on to my kids.
I know what you mean. Perry's book really has a way of making you look inward. It's not just about identifying problems. It's about giving you tools to actually change and grow and become the parent you want to be.
It's been such an interesting deep dive. We've talked about so much: the impact of our own childhoods, the need for self-awareness, and how powerful self-care can be.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground. But it's important to remember that this journey of self-discovery and growth, it's a lifelong process. It's not about reaching some imaginary finish line of being a perfect parent.
Right. There's no such thing as perfect. It's about showing up every day and being open and curious, both with ourselves and our children, and remembering that we're all learning as we go.
And that's what makes it so beautiful and meaningful. It's about trying our best, making mistakes, and learning from them. And that goes for both us and our kids.
So true. I love that. Before we wrap up, I wanted to leave our listeners with one last question to think about. It's from Perry's book, and it really got me thinking. What seemingly normal aspects of your childhood might be influencing your parenting today?
It's a great question. It makes you stop and really examine your own experiences, doesn't it? The more we understand our own stories, the better parents we can be for our children. It's all connected.
It really is. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We hope it's given you some food for thought and maybe even inspired you to keep exploring this amazing journey of being a parent.